Joining us here on the show from pirate ship to mothership, Mike Ryan joins us. Mike, good morning. How we doing?
Doing all right. The power in my house went out, so I drove all the way to South Beach just to make this hit for you. And also have internet access. Who am I playing? But happy to be here.
Well, we appreciate the commitment to excellence here by Mike Ryan. Good to have you here, bud. And this is an enormous kind of sea change for soccer to have had this potential Super League and then within days have it disbanded. We've been trying to pick through the reasons why ultimately it died such a quick death. If you were to bullet point the biggest one, what do you think the reason was that it got killed last night?
Masterclass in public relations spin by UEFA and FIFA and the Premier League. They played the emotional card with supporters and fan bases. All these Super League clubs, and I'm not at all defending it, I am not pro Super League, but what they were looking to do was replace the Champions League, which is a meritocracy, which is a very popular competition. It's one that I love. It's the best club competition on the planet. But they were just looking to replace that one thing, that midweek competition. And these clubs were arguing, people tune in for us. They don't tune in for Real Sociedad versus Red Bull Salzburg. They tune in to watch Juventus versus Barcelona. And they are absolutely right in that. They wanted a bigger piece of the pie. But UEFA and the domestic leagues and FIFA were saying, well, this move means we got to kick them out of the domestic leagues. The Champions League is going to be more diluted. FIFA is going as far as to say players on these individual clubs that are a part of the Super League, they can't compete in international competition. So now the formation of this Super League is not just ripping away the Champions League, which could have been spun into an enhancement, potentially, to, by doing this, they're changing your FIFA video game, they're changing the World Cup, they're changing the Euros, they're changing the Premier League, and all the fans throw their hands up in the air in an uproar. It was a masterclass in public relations spin, and it was a disaster class by the Super League clubs that you would think with the backing of JP Morgan financially, they'd find a better way. I think their biggest mistake was in the messaging, not making this an open competition. It would be so hard for other clubs to make a climb like a Chelsea or Manchester City that were in lower divisions and with infusion of money and success became one of the world's elite. I think it was a textbook example on how not to launch one of these things.
It's true. It is remarkable. And these are 12 billionaires many times over that have been successful at a lot of things. And this thing failed and they got to walk it back and they get humiliated last night. And I would say power to the people that the fans and the outcry and the media changed this. But how much had to happen from UEFA and FIFA standpoint? Because if UEFA and FIFA supported this, was just the crush of the fans' criticism ever going to stop it?
Well, supporters have a voice there. And I do think to a degree, DA, Super League is inevitable. We're already hearing about compromises that UEFA had to make because of this power play. But over here in the United States, we're kind of resigned to capitalism and sports being a business. Over there, not so much. And I think, quite honestly, the biggest future impediment of a Super League actually happening, because, look, it was all too convenient, the pandemic messaging that was in this public relations release. We've heard about Super League for 20 years. These clubs have reportedly been trying to plan something like this for a very long time. So to use the pandemic as a rationalization for it, it was actually more convenient than anything because they didn't have to face the fans with empty stadiums, DA, because supporters would voice their displeasure. No one really had the Chelsea supporters, which I don't know how much you know about Chelsea, but the whole thing is we ain't got no history and where were you before Roman Abramovich came? And not all of it is at all accurate. But the Chelsea supporters, you hold these protests for dramatic images that can captivate the world for your cause. Petr Cech, a club legend, trying to move supporters away, saying, we hear you, we understand, we'll get it sorted, just let our team bust through an hour or so before a match is slated to kick off, is dramatic imagery. And once all the other clubs in the Premier League saw that, they realized we got to be out. And that's what's going to be the impediment for something like this in the future, because the Spanish clubs operate under a completely different model, DA. Barcelona and Real Madrid have been on top of that La Liga for generations. There are about 6 matches that matter in a La Liga season. Their domestic TV contract here in the United States is terrible. No one really has beIN Sports anymore. So they realize we got to stop playing Getafe and we got to start playing Juventus. But they can't do that without the likes of the Premier League, which just found out in itself it might be a super league.
It's also interesting because you're right. There's some similarities and parallels to American sports, and then other things are just totally different. Mike Ryan joins us on the disbanding of the Super League in dramatic fashion, like Crystal Pepsi and New Coke. It was here one day and gone the next. As a huge Chelsea supporter yourself and host of Chelsea Mic'd Up, did you feel like if this went through, this was going to crush your love of the sport and the team and the game if Chelsea would have left for Super League and not been allowed to compete in the Premier League?
I think I'd be disingenuous if I said yes. I love the history. I'm drawn to the meritocracy of it all. I'm drawn to how Leicester City can win the Premier League, even though it's not necessarily a realistic proposition for a club to go from the third tier in English football all the way to the top in a few years. It's not really realistic. The chances are there. It is indeed possible. And like a lot of Americans that have been moving over to the Premier League and falling in love with the sport because it is continuing to grow here in the United States, I like that it's not like America. But I also think some of this romanticism of the Premier League, for example, is a bit of a false characterization, because the Premier League in itself was born out of a similar move in the 1990s when they broke away from the FA. Football is a business. And right now, what you're seeing is a lot of convenient anti-American sentiment. Look, Manchester United and Liverpool, who are the English clubs that were really driving this, it's true, they have American ownership. But this isn't an American enterprise. Greed isn't the exclusive domain of the Americans. You have Real Madrid and their club president being the president of the European Super League. All the global owners want what the American owners have, which is operating within a closed market. You know exactly what your margins are. You're not held accountable if your team misses the playoffs. In Europe, it's more of a meritocracy. If you have a disappointing season, you lose out on hundreds of millions of dollars. Chelsea a couple of years ago missed the Champions League. It was devastating for their bottom line. The further you go in that competition, the more money you can make, and the more you can keep a club like that afloat. Other owners don't like that in world football. They want what America has, and I do think to a degree it's going to happen. However, it was probably on a more positive trajectory, a slower transition, going back to the negotiating table, making more and more compromises. The fact that they did the hard part and it was such a disaster probably nukes this for a couple of years, DA.
You would think so. And I wonder if there's a lesson to be had in American sports, because as you said, the Glazers own Man U. They also own the Buccaneers. Stan Kroenke owns Arsenal. He also owns the Rams and multiple other professional American franchises. The Fenway Group obviously owns the Red Sox, and they own Liverpool. Do you think for those American business owners, there is a lesson for their American sports teams in what type of disaster this was, or what they can or cannot get away with?
No, because American sports is structured the way it is, and I think if there's a lesson here, it might actually be for the fans, DA, because I mean, we see it in college football where the fans wield a lot of power because they're boosters and they can convince Tennessee to not hire Greg Schiano. We've seen it, fan bases mobilize in college football where there's more of a tribalism that's more akin to what you see in world football. But if you don't like something and you take it to the streets and you provide dramatic imagery, you can fight things. And maybe that's the lesson to be had here, that supporters and fans can actually bring about real change, because that's what absolutely happened with the European Super League. The fans stopped it.
So there had to be a little part of you that is just, it was so warm and fuzzy inside as you saw your Chelsea supporters demonstrating in the streets and not allowing the bus to go by, huh? I mean, it's gotta make you feel proud.
I do think that Chelsea found a way to win, And there was only one way to win in this European Super League, and that was be the first team out.
Yeah.
Now, in official club statements, they weren't actually the first team out. That was probably Manchester City. However, people understand that the tipping point was the Chelsea supporters and those captivating images. That was really what broke this. And if there's a winner, it's the Chelsea supporters internationally, and being the first one out publicly, because that's what they were saying. That's how they disbanded the crowd, saying we're going to be out of it. That's actually a good look, because now you've gone from ruining the world's game to being one of the saviors. It's a little too convenient. And to answer a previous question, DA, no, I'd still be watching if they were in the European Super League. If it's Chelsea versus Barcelona, followed by Chelsea versus Juventus, followed by Chelsea versus Real Madrid, that's amazing. I'm an American, though. I started following Chelsea in 2003. I'm a glory hunter. I might as well lean into it. And that being said, I've been to lower division. I've seen English football live and in person at all levels. And I love the fact that you can have those Cinderella stories. But this is a business, and it'll eventually get there. But considering how disastrous this launch was, probably won't get there for a long time now.
Glory hunting is not usually the landscape of a Browns fan. And so we will wrap up with your Browns fandom. Now that Mike Tomlin has this extension and Kevin Stefanski feels like he is the guy, and after beating the Steelers last year in the playoffs and feeling really good, I mean, do you now live in a new reality with Browns expectations going, yeah, not only are we supposed to go to the playoffs this year, we're supposed to actually make noise in January?
I mean, a part of me is always going to be preparing myself for having my heart ripped out, but it's my favorite Browns memory since I've been alive. Smashing, not just beating, demolishing the Pittsburgh Steelers, making Ben Roethlisberger cry. And I haven't been impressed with those offseason moves. So you're bringing back Juju Smith-Schuster, you're bringing back Big Ben. Okay, I guess you restructure their contracts and make them cheaper, but I think they're on a downward trajectory. Cleveland Browns obviously on an upward trajectory. They got to do something about their linebackers because they're analytics based and they don't care about those. And I wonder where in your flow charts for analytics do you have Chad Henne turning the corner on your linebackers? So I hope we do something there. I'm excited about Clowney, and I'm excited about the pairing of a healthier Myles Garrett. It's not sexy because it's not a twisted ankle or torn ACL, but Myles Garrett was very clearly not himself. He was operating at 70% capacity at best because of his bout with COVID, and it probably would have changed that game even more so against the Kansas City Chiefs. It was there for the taking, DA. I don't know if you're going to get the opportunity to play the Chiefs with Chad Henne all too often in the playoffs. So I'm a little bummed that they miss out there. But yeah, it would be a disappointment now for me if the Browns don't finish ahead of Pittsburgh. Baltimore is going to be a tough road to hoe. Those two teams match up quite well, though. Can we actually get a division title in Cleveland? I believe in some places they're favored to do so. That'd be massive for me.
Mike Ryan joining us this morning on the show. If you're interested in this whole Super League fallout, he's done amazing work on Chelsea Mic'd Up. Check out that podcast. If you're a supporter of Chelsea, it's a great listen. Chelsea Mic'd Up, everywhere podcasts are available. And since you guys broke away from ESPN Radio, people looking for the Dan Le Batard Show, the pirate ship still sails. And so tell our listeners where they might be able to find you guys as you are, across the high seas.
Well, the pirate ship is thriving. You can find us wherever you find your podcasts, whether it be Spotify or Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, whatever your platform is of choice. The Dan Le Batard Show with Stu Gatz. We actually did a bonus emergency pod yesterday. Chris Whittingham and I, my co-host on Chelsea Mic'd Up, is now with our show here based out of Miami. We did a whole huge Super League emergency pod. If you want a little bit more information on that, we also, over at Meadowlark Media, the parent company to the Jim Brockmeyer podcast and a lot of other great properties on our Le Batard and Friends network feed. So if you're interested in all the great content that we produce over here, make sure to search out the Le Batard and Friends network feed.
Got Mystery Crate going on. Brockmeyer has his own podcast now, which is awesome. So you guys are doing great stuff. I really appreciate you hustling today to make this thing work for us. Very much appreciated. Very much admire all the work you guys do, man. Thanks so much for doing it with us today.
Hey, thank you, and thank you for treating soccer like it's not a punchline. Like it's a. I think we're really seeing a sea change here with how soccer is covered in the media. I'm not hearing about boring 0-0 draws anymore. So maybe they hit it at the right time on the sports calendar, but there is a sea change with young media people really recognizing soccer for a legitimate sport, and that's encouraging for people like me.
No doubt. When I started this 20 years ago, I mean, you could not get away with saying anything about soccer without getting a scoff and laughed at and shut up. It's soccer, but as the Premier League has grown in popularity, the World Cup has grown in popularity. People have just understood more because of the internet, because of the way that it's covered, and now, it's legit. It's totally legit to be able to talk about it as a real sport, which, like you, I'm refreshed to see. It's always fun to see that change happen. So, appreciate you, Mike. Be good, buddy.
Thanks for having me.